What if a single voice could carry an entire lifetime of pain, hope, and unanswered prayers? What if, in one moment, the world stopped not because of shock, but because it finally felt something real? Long before the stage lights turned on, long before millions would watch, the silence had already shaped him. Miguel Santos stood alone, wrapped in a quiet that felt heavier than noise. This silence was familiar. It had followed him since childhood. In the Philippines, silence had meaning. It meant holding back hunger so others could eat. It meant dreams whispered instead of spoken. It meant learning early that survival often required restraint. Miguel learned to listen more than he spoke. He listened to rain hitting thin roofs. He listened to his mother's tired footsteps late at night. He listened to an old radio that sometimes worked, sometimes didn't. And when it worked, one voice always found him. Elvis. Not as a star. Not as a legend. But as a feeling. That voice filled spaces where words failed. It carried strength wrapped in vulnerability. It sounded like someone who had been broken, and kept singing anyway. Miguel held on to that sound through years of struggle. Through moments when giving up felt easier than hoping. Through days when the future looked smaller than fear. Now, standing on the world's most unforgiving stage, that same silence returned. But it felt different. This silence was waiting. The audience did not yet know his story. The judges did not yet know his weight. Simon Cowell sat calm, prepared to measure, analyze, decide. But Miguel was not here to be measured. He carried his mother's sacrifices in his chest. He carried sleepless nights in his breath. He carried every time he chose faith over fear. As the lights dimmed, the room held its breath. And in that pause, between who he was and who he might become, Miguel stood steady. Because some voices are not trained to impress. They are shaped to survive. And when they finally rise, they don't ask for permission. They ask to be felt. Every voice is born somewhere. Miguel's was born in a home where walls were thin and dreams had to be careful. The kind of place where life taught lessons early and gently, but firmly. His childhood moved at a slow, patient rhythm. Mornings began with light filtering through worn curtains. Evenings ended with exhaustion resting on his mother's shoulders. Luz Santos carried her world quietly. Her strength was not loud. It lived in routine, in consistency, in showing up no matter how heavy the day felt. She worked long hours, often returning home when the sky had already gone dark. Her hands told stories her mouth never did. Cracked skin. Aching joints. A softness that never disappeared. Miguel noticed everything. He learned that love did not always speak. Sometimes, it simply endured. Music became his refuge without him realizing it. He sang while helping with chores. He sang to fill empty spaces. He sang when words felt unnecessary. The old radio was unreliable, but when it worked, it changed the air in the room. Elvis's voice traveled across oceans and time, landing gently in Miguel's world. It sounded confident, yet fragile. Powerful, yet human. Miguel did not understand technique. He understood emotion. He practiced quietly, never wanting to disturb his mother's rest. His voice grew not from lessons, but from lived experience. From watching sacrifice. From feeling gratitude too large for language. There were moments when practicality demanded surrender. Moments when dreams felt irresponsible. But Luz never stopped believing, even when she said nothing. Her faith became Miguel's foundation. That belief followed him as life tested his resolve. Opportunities slipped away. Rejections left their marks. Yet the dream remained, fragile but persistent. Because some dreams are not born from ambition. They are born from love. And love, when given time, learns how to sing. The stage felt colder than Miguel expected. Bright lights washed over him, erasing the edges of the room and leaving him exposed in a sea of quiet. Every step forward carried weight. Not fear alone, but memory. This was not the first time he had stood alone. But it was the first time the world was watching. The audience settled into anticipation. Hundreds of eyes fixed on a man they did not yet know. To them, he was just another hopeful. To Miguel, this moment held everything. The space before the music began stretched endlessly. That pause felt familiar. It echoed the many pauses in his life, moments of waiting, of wondering, of holding on. He felt the presence of the judges before he fully saw them. Their reputations filled the room as much as their seats did. At the center sat Simon Cowell, composed and unreadable. Simon's stillness was intimidating. Years of experience had sharpened his instincts. Nothing about this environment was forgiving. Miguel took in the silence. It pressed against his chest, testing his resolve. This silence had ended many dreams before they ever began. But something within him remained steady. He grounded himself in memory. The smell of rain-soaked streets back home. The sound of his mother's quiet humming late at night. The feeling of singing softly so no one else would hear. Those moments had trained him for this one. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt full. Filled with everything that had led him here. He did not need to prove anything. He needed to release something. As he centered himself, fear softened into focus. The weight on his shoulders became purpose. This was not a stage meant to break him. It was a place meant to receive him. And as the final breath before sound passed through him, Miguel stood calm. Ready to let his story speak, without words. The first note changed the room. It did not arrive with force. It arrived with truth. Miguel's voice rose gently, shaped by years of quiet endurance. There was no rush, no attempt to impress. Only control, restraint, and depth. The sound carried something older than technique. It carried memory. As the melody unfolded, the air itself seemed to slow. The audience leaned forward without realizing it. Breaths were held. Time loosened its grip. This was not imitation. This was inheritance. Elvis lived in the tone, but Miguel lived in the emotion. Each note held weight, not because it was loud, but because it was honest. The voice sounded weathered in the most beautiful way. And then something rare happened. Simon Cowell stopped moving. His posture stiffened, not in judgment, but in recognition. Years of hearing polished voices had trained him to detect the artificial. This was not that. This voice had been earned. There was pain in it. There was gratitude. There was a kind of courage that does not announce itself. Simon's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. The sharp analysis gave way to stillness. The room noticed. The silence between notes became as powerful as the sound itself. It demanded attention without asking for it. Miguel sang as if nothing else existed. Not the cameras. Not the judges. Not the outcome. This was not a performance chasing approval. It was a moment of truth unfolding naturally. And in that moment, the usual boundaries disappeared. Between judge and performer. Between expectation and reality. The final note lingered, suspended in the air like a held breath. No one rushed to react. Because some moments arrive so honestly, they require silence first. And in that silence, Simon Cowell remained frozen. Not because he was shocked. But because he was moved. Far from the stage, in a place untouched by bright lights, Luz Santos sat quietly in a small room that felt suddenly too still. The television screen glowed softly, casting shadows on familiar walls. She did not sit comfortably. She leaned forward, as if distance could be crossed by hope alone. Her son stood where she once feared he never would. As Miguel's voice filled the room, Luz felt time collapse. She no longer saw the stage. She saw a little boy singing to himself, careful not to be heard. She saw nights spent counting coins, deciding what could wait until tomorrow. Every note carried memory. Not just Miguel's, but hers. She remembered mornings that began before sunrise. Work that left her hands sore and her body tired. Dreams she placed aside without regret. Because love had made the choice for her. Luz had never asked for recognition. She did not need applause. She measured success in quieter ways. Warm meals, safe nights, small joys. Now, as the song continued, something deep within her released. Years of worry softened into pride. Sacrifice transformed into meaning. This moment was not about fame. It was proof that nothing had been wasted. On the screen, Miguel stood steady. But Luz saw the journey behind that stillness. Every tear swallowed. Every fear endured. As the final note faded, she placed her hand over her chest. Not to calm herself, but to hold the feeling. Her sacrifice had found its voice. And somewhere across the world, without words, a mother understood that love, when given freely, always finds a way to sing.